Welcome everyone and welcome to this week's F3 Fix track guide. We are at Hockenheim this week and what a lovely track this is. Fast, free flowing. It's got the long drafty section in the first couple of sectors, and then we have the more technical twisty turny stadium section to end the lap off with. So yeah, real mixture of different elements in one track, but should make for some good racing. Now the fix setup this week, iRacing, you are 4 for 4. It's really nicely balanced this week. There's not too much downforce, so you still get a nice amount of top speed, but then there is enough downforce to still feel comfortable through the twisty turny stadium section towards the end of the lap. So yeah, I may end up using the fix setup in the officials. We'll see. I'm yet to try the open setups, but this did feel really good. So yeah, the track temperature was at 27 degrees. As always, we generate the weather as per iRacing's schedule, which can be found on their website. The PDF outlines all the session dates and times, and the time I set was a 1:31.4. Now there was a couple of little mistakes in this lap that you're about to see. Very minimal if I'm being hard on myself, but I'll show you guys where I could have gained a little bit more extra time. But as always with a track like this, it's very difficult to try and get that perfect lap, and as always we always find more time when we review our laps back of where we could have improved. But yeah, lo and behold, let's head into it. Remember to hit that like and subscribe button, guys. Turn those notifications on. As always, it is going to be the cockpit view to start off with, then the far chase camera angle, and then we are going to analyse that flying lap afterwards to show the braking markers and how we did it. So yeah, let's head into it. So guys, that was the lap from cockpit view and far chase camera angle. Let's have a look how we did it, shall we? Now we're on the start finish straight here, but what I want to just let you guys know before we get to the first corner is that my brake bias, I set it at 54.4. Always drop it down a couple of clicks because the fixed setup base is just way too high. So yeah, use that as a base, guys, and then go from there. Now, we're just going to pause it here because we are just about to head into turn one. What we are going to be keeping an eye out for here is our 50 ball marker. Now, turn one is a very fast right-hander. So much so that there's a very big runoff on the left-hand side here that you can see. And while this is an off-track, guys, we can use this to, one, sneakily gain a bit of time because it is quicker, and also as it means, as the name suggests, to escape from the carnage that may happen on our inside. Now, first couple of laps, or specifically the first lap, if someone's on your inside, cold tyres, full tank of fuel, people are going to understeer. So for the sake of 1x and for the sake of your race not ending and avoiding a crash, take this runoff, use this concrete runoff. I'll show you in a second as we go around this corner, but as you run down this, you can run down it quite severely without getting a slowdown. You can't run completely all the way down it. iRacing aren't that generous, but they are generous enough that they understand, just as in real life, that this is a means of escape to avoid crashes. So yeah, but as always, we want to stay within the letter of the law, specifically when it comes to qualifying, because 1x is going to be no good and you'll be dying from the back of the pack. So let's have a look at how we do it. So we keep an eye out for the 50 ball marker here, just as we slow it down, and we're braking just before it, and it's just a little dab of the brakes, guys, nothing too much, turning it in. And as we get round the corner and as the sausage curb really comes into view, you can see my throttle inputs, but I'm getting on the throttle very early here. As I said, it's a dab of the brakes and then we're back straight on the throttle before we even reach the apex. As always, as I mentioned just earlier, tight to this sausage curb but not on it. You will lose time if you clip it. Of course, if you turn in too early and you take it full, the car is more than likely going to spin and end up in this wall. Be very lucky if you don't end up in the wall, or at least causing a crash. Now we allow the car to drift out to the left-hand side using all of this blue and white curb here. And we're just going to pause it here because, as we said, over here we can use, but it's a 1x. Just for reference, this white line here, which runs parallel with the edge of the blue and white curb, as we just bring it back slightly, this indicates the edge of the racetrack. So if you go beyond this, you will get a 1x. As I said, there's quite a long path here, or strip of concrete, that we can use to run off. As we play it on, you can see the green stuff does eventually run out. If you join up kind of here, you will get a slowdown, I believe. So just be careful. If you do run off, try and rejoin the track as soon as you can. Now, just back there, we do want to use that blue curb as a runoff. While it does slightly unsettle the car, it is quicker. If you go through the first corner there and you're not running out onto that blue curb, you haven't carried enough speed. And you will be a little bit of a sitting duck down this little straight here into the second corner, because this is a nice overtaking opportunity here. It's not essential to make an overtake because the next, after we get round turn 2, technically turn 3 is the big long dog leg, but that is a prime overtaking opportunity. That's where 95% of your overtakes are going to be done, is obviously down that big long back straight / dog leg, because technically that's what it is, but very drafty back there. So turn 1 isn't essential to make an overtake, just you want to stay tight as you can to them and make sure you get a good exit so that you can even overtake them down here, or once again stay close enough to them to overtake down into the hairpin, which is at the end of the dog leg. Now what we're keeping an eye out for is the 100 ball marker, and really, if you're being specific, which I normally am, as anyone who's watched my track guides will know, is I'm braking round. I'm keeping an eye out for the 100 ball marker. I'm not actually looking at this runoff here, but if you're being specific, that is actually when we brake. But I'm looking at the 100 ball marker. You can see I'm braking kind of just before here, hugging the left hand side of the track because we want to open this right hander because it's very tight here, and it's going to be, you'll see a lot of people spin here. There's quite a few corners around this racetrack where you'll see people spin, especially early on, because throttle control and steering input is very important around here. And as you can see, we go shift down all the way into second, start turning in just after we get past the 50 ball marker. And we've got another pesky sausage curb. Hate them in these cars. And once again, we want to keep it as tight to this curb as possible. And you can see my throttle inputs. I'm trail braking into this corner. And then just before we get to the apex, I'm getting back on the throttle. But I'm easing onto the throttle. I'm not on full throttle at this point, because if I am, and I stamp my foot down on that green pedal, I'm going to spin, because as you can see here, I've got 90 degrees steering lock. It's only going to do one thing. The car is just going to want to overtake me from behind. So easing on the throttle, and it's only when we straighten out the steering that that's when we get fully down, push our foot down, and then full throttle. Now, I'm going to pull it back here a little bit because I'm being very critical of myself here. I always am, and I think we should be. And here, I actually carry a little bit too much speed. I do lose a little bit of time. So I would have liked to have taken this corner a little bit slower to get the front end of this car round to the right a little bit earlier. Because what I actually do is, while I'm on half throttle here, the car drifts out a little bit too far because I carry too much speed. And because of that, I'm unable to get on the throttle as early as I would like, because the car isn't pointing in a straight line soon enough. You can see here roughly how there's a dark patch in the track, and that's the rubber of like kind of the ideal racing line. And I'm a little bit beyond that. So ideally, I need to be a little bit more on the inside there, just have a little bit less speed. So I should have taken a little bit more brake or been a little bit harder on the brake. I allowed the car to roll through the corner a little bit too quickly, and unfortunately carried too much speed, and that's compromised my exit ever so slightly. But it's such an important corner because, as I said, this is the prime overtaking opportunity on the racetrack. There's a very long run down here now, because from this point onwards it's full throttle for a very long way, all the way down into the hairpin. So it's essential to get a good drive around there. If I'd just had a little bit more brake, I would have got the car pointing straighter earlier, and I would have been able to have got on the throttle a lot sooner, and thus carrying more speed. So likewise though, regardless of if you're a little bit wide or on the ideal line, which is ideally where you should be, losing the name, we want to harry along this curb as close as we can without actually getting on the AstroTurf, because there is a little bit of a dip there, so you will lose traction. And in some worst cases, cutting that corner there, you'll actually spin, because as I said, there's a bit of a drop. So yeah, just stay away from it, really. But we're now going to run this all the way down to the hairpin, keeping it as tight to the curb or the left-hand side as possible, covering as little track as possible. All the way down into the hairpin, and we're just going to pause it here because we're keeping an eye out for the 100 ball marker once again. Now, this is going to be where, all I said, 95% of the overtake is going to be made. It's probably where 95% of the crashes are going to be had as well, because that is a very long draft down into this corner. Now, unlike Watkins Glen earlier on in the season, where there's a nice swooping right-hander and there's not really a lot of brake that is required into the corner at the end of the draft, this has a very sharp hairpin where you're basically coming back on yourself 180 back down the other way. So lots of people, when you get in the draft here, you will need to pull your braking marker back a touch to accommodate for the extra speed that you're carrying. I know a lot of people seem to make this mistake when they get in the draft, because what's going to happen, especially earlier on, there's going to be a lot of cars in front of you, depending on where you start on the grid. And by overshooting in the corner, you can just, because it's a 180, you'll see a lot of people, unfortunately, take out the guys in front of them who are a couple of places ahead, who are actually minding their own business, going around the hairpin. So we need the braking marker here is very essential at the best of times, let alone when you're in the draft. So what we keep an eye out for is the 100 ball marker, and just as we forward it on, we're braking just before it. Now, as I said, specifics, I'm braking pretty much on this line here, or at the end of this little AstroTurf. I am not focusing on that. It's too minimal within my vision for me to really focus on it. The 100 ball marker, braking just before it, is where I'm looking. So as we go down, hugging the left hand side, we are going to go down into second gear and then into firsts. This is a first gear corner, and we want to start turning just before, or just as the apex really comes into view. It's going to take a lot of practice, this corner. But really, if you want something in your peripheral vision to look at, to turn in, the end of this barrier here, the orange barrier, as this kind of starts to kind of come in out of your view in your peripheral, or starts to go into your peripheral vision, that's when you can turn in. But as always, you should be looking into the apex, and you should be in first gear before you get into this hairpin, guys. Second gear, or if you don't shift down into first gear before this hairpin, you will overshoot it slightly. You will get understeer. So yeah, it's definitely a first gear corner. And as you can see, we're trail braking here into the corner. And then we start to just get on the throttle a little bit. But we have to be very patient around this corner. Very patient, because we're on full lock. But as you can see, we're hitting the edge of the apex here, pretty much the end of the corner. Ideally, just slightly going over the blue curb, the blue and white curb. And then we are on the throttle at this point. So as you hit the apex, we're getting on the throttle. We're releasing the brake, and we're getting on the throttle. But what we're doing is we're not getting on full throttle. It's very progressive because, as I said, at this point, I've got full steering lock. Like, the wheel is upside down. If I get full on the throttle, it's going to do one thing, and the rear is just going to overtake me. So you cannot get on the throttle too early here, guys. Patience is key. Unfortunately, people will do it during the week. You may be in the heat of the battle, and just get on the throttle too early. But yeah, just patience is key in this corner. Now, what we want to do is you want to allow the car to drift out to the left-hand side. So we want to open the steering, and as we open the steering, that's when we then get on the throttle. Bosh. Full throttle, allow the car to drift over. Keeping the wheels just inside this sausage curb, you can get them on them, but if you go over, you will lose time because the car will ground out and bottom out. If someone is on your inside, you can use this runoff. You will get a 1x, but it's definitely a 1x worth taking rather than crashing, and you won't get a slowdown. So yeah, definitely something to consider there, guys. And then we're on full throttle all the way down to the next corner just before we get into the stadium section. Now, this is just a nice little kink, covering as little track as possible. And we're going to pause it here because we now come up to another tight left-hander. Not a hairpin, but a tight left-hander, very similar to turn 2. And what we keep an eye out for, guys, as we just wind it back a touch, is not the 50 ball marker, because that's too far ahead. We keep an eye on the edge or the end of this blue and white curb. Now, this is pretty much 100 ball marker, or should we say 90, 80, if you're going to be specific. But I would actually say it's probably about 100 in all fairness. But that is our braking marker. It's the end of this blue and white curb, as you can see. Now we're hugging the right hand side because we want to use all of the track to open up the angle of attack into the corner. Shifting down all the way into second. And very similar to turn 2, is we want to keep this tight to it. Another pesky sausage curb. Keeping as close to it as possible. As you can see, a little bit of trail braking here. Into the corner, just to steady the car and get the nose of the car turning in. Managing the weight transfers, what we're doing with the trail braking. And then as you can see, I'm getting on the throttle as I hit the apex. Once again, managing the throttle control, not getting on full throttle until I know I've got the steering open and the car pointing straight and I'm in control of the car. You don't want to allow this car to run it. While we've got this runoff over here, if you go over to the right hand side here onto this curb, you have gone too wide, because you're then very quickly over to the left hand side and then shifting it back over to the right. So we'll just play this on. As you can see, you're turning left, you're opening up the steering, but then you're still holding the steering left because you want to open up this right hander and we want to get over to this curb. Now you don't want to be all the way over so that you're riding this curb. As I said, there's a very quick shift in lateral movement here, and when you've got a full tank of fuel, specifically cold tires, but more so when you've got a full tank of fuel, sorry, the shift in the lateral movement, especially with the swooshing of the tank, of the fuel in the tank, will unsettle the rear of the car, and you can very easily lose it going through this right hander. That's why it's essential not to be too wide here, because there's too much movement, because you're then coming in at a more of an acute angle here. So you go around and then you come through and then you're turning the wheel right a lot more sharply than you should be, and then that just lateral movement in the way, and you spin the car. So yeah, just be careful. That's why it's essential to keep it nice and tight around that left hander there, so that you're minimizing that shift in weight. Full throttle all the way around here, guys, and we want to keep it on this blue and white curb. Don't allow the wheels here to drop onto the AstroTurf, because there is quite a big drop. It doesn't look like it. More often than not, through practice, I have tried it to see if it's quicker. You spin the car, so stay away from that AstroTurf as best as you can, just as close as you can, but stay far away from it, and then allow the car to drift over to the left. Now, of course, if you're in the heat of the battle, going side by side, you can use this runoff once again. It is only a 1x, not a slowdown. You want to stay off of this sausage curb and this blue and white curb at all costs. There is a big dip here that you can probably see, and the car grounds out. Or you don't crash, but you lose a lot of speed. It is quicker to just bow out and go round there and give them the place in essence. Allow them to keep the inside, because it's just, you lose so much time down here. But running it down, and then we're going to pause it here, because we are now coming into the most difficult corner on the track. It's very similar to turn 1, but unlike turn 1, picking out a braking marker and picking out a turning point is very difficult, or it's been very difficult for me, at least, in trying to put this guide together for you all. But this is what this guide is here for, and this is what I'm here to do, is try and point out these things for you to make it easier for us all. So we're going to bring it down here, and it's a very fast right-hander once again, but unlike T1, there's very minimal runoff. There is runoff, but if you go too far, there is gravel, and it can it can end badly, to say the least. Now, here, unfortunately, this is why it's been so difficult to pick out a turning point and a braking marker. There's no actual boards. Now, I don't know if this is like, if this is the case in real life, if there's actual boards hanging off these fences. I believe there is. Could be wrong. I'm sure someone will tell me in the comments if there is or not. But in iRacing, we have no yardage markers here. So we have to use something along this fence, a pole, a sign, to as a braking marker and to turning point, because otherwise we're going in blind. Now, what I've discovered is this little couple of sets of floodlights here, or this set of floodlights here, that is our braking marker and our turning point. Now, as we are in turn 1, it is only a dab of the brakes. As you can see, here we go. So it's just gone into our peripheral vision, or just gone past, and that is where we're then just dabbing the brakes, turning in. Then the apex comes into view because it's almost a blind corner in essence. And then, as you can see, we're back on the throttle very quickly before the apex really even comes into view. Try not to get on the AstroTurf. It is very touch and go. Sometimes you get round it or go on it and get a lot of speed. Other times the car really bottoms out, and worse times you actually lose control and spin. So yeah, it's try and stay off the AstroTurf as much as you can, just on the blue and white curb, which we did just. Nearly went on the AstroTurf. And then here we was on the inside of the blue and white curb. Now, this is a corner that, once again, I probably could have got on the throttle a lot sooner. I could have maybe dabbed the brakes not as much, or held the brakes not as much, because you can use all of this runoff. But as I said here, there's this nasty gravel. It can... once again, like the AstroTurf that we've just gone past, it's very touch and go. Sometimes you can keep your foot down and save the car and rejoin the track. Other times you just lose the car and spin, and then you're in no man's land. And it takes you an age to get control of the car and get back on track, where by then you've lost a considerable amount of places. So yes, I could have probably just dabbed the brakes and then got back on the throttle here. But for me, consistency is key around here. If someone is following you close behind, they're going to find it with the nature of the corner, with how it's blind. It's going to be very difficult for them to stay close to you and then make an overtake down into the hairpin in the stadium section, which we'll come up to very quickly. We'll come up to next. So going around here consistently and in control is more important than just outright speed. Of course, we want to gain as much speed as possible, and there is time to be gained here, but it's such a difficult corner in that essence to get right every single time. It's just, yeah, that works for me. I still did a good time, and I think that time I've set as well will fare quite well for this week. So that would be my advice to you guys. But let's carry on and head down into the hairpin and into the stadium section. Now, what we're keeping an eye out for is the 50 ball marker, and as you can just see, we're braking just before it. I found that with the brake bias I had set, 54.4, I did try it a bit lower as well, because this corner in particular, if you brake on the 50, the nature of how it's cambered, you lock up your left front quite severely, and then of course that shoots you wide, and then it upsets this whole corner. So braking just a bit before the 50, down into second gear, just allows you to keep the tyres rolling and not lock up. A little bit of trail brake around here, keeping it as tight to the apex as you can. Now, it is a late apex here, guys. You don't want to turn in and hit the apex here as it starts. You want to wait to turn in and hit the apex, really, like as you can see now. So as the grandstand ends, that's where you want to be tight to it. I was a little bit far away from it. I would like to be closer. Of course, don't touch the AstroTurf. There's no need to touch that. It's quite raised and it will unsettle the car. Not a lot of grip either. But we're trail braking at this point, and then as we get halfway round, as we see this nice big oil container in front, propped up, the yellow one, you can't miss it. That is when we want to get on the throttle, as you can see. And then as it comes into the center of our view, so at this point we're around about halfway round, or just over halfway round this hairpin, we're on full throttle, opening up the steering and allowing the car to drift out to the right. Now, in an ideal world, guys, you want to be where I am, car middle of this blue and white curb. Don't want it to go any further over than that. There's a little bit of a drop here that you can't see, and you lose time. The car bobbles quite a bit, shifting over onto that AstroTurf and then coming back onto the track, onto the left-hand side of it. So yeah, try, while we can use this, it's ideal to not use it because it's not optimum time. Full throttle all the way through here, keeping it tight once again on the blue and white curb, staying off the AstroTurf for the same reason behind on the previous corner or runoff, and then we're keeping it tight to this sausage curb here, just running straight up with the right wheels, missing the sausage curb, and then very quickly, so what we've done here, we're pointing the car over to the left hand side of the track to open up the right hander, because we've got a right hander and then we've got another right hander, and it's very essential here to set up your run down into turn one or the start finish straight. So as you can see, unfortunately there's not really a visual braking marker, it's more feel, time and feel. So once you get just after this curb, you're then on the brake, shifting down into third, allowing the car to move over. We don't want to be too far over because you'll lose time. By the time you've gone from back the curb just behind or the corner just behind to over here, you've lost time. You've covered too much track, unessential track, to get tight to this corner. You won't be able to keep tight to it. So we're trail braking a little bit, and then just before we get to the apex, we're back on the throttle. But we're not full throttle just yet. Keeping our wheels over the curb, covering as little track as possible. And then as we get just over the crest, that's when we then get on full throttle. As you can see, straightening out the steering, allowing the car to move over to the left because we've got one final right-hander, and we want the wheels to be as close to this sausage curb as we can. Now here I cut it very fine margins. I had my wheels on the curb, or on the sausage curb, very close for comfort. But you can see here that very quickly, as I get to this curb, I lift off the throttle. Now, if I was in first couple of laps and I had a full tank of fuel and cold tyres, I will be hitting the brakes here, or have a dab at the brakes to get the front end turning here. But because we've got obviously not as much fuel in the car, the tyres are up to temperature, we've got a lot of grip and the car feels good. So we can be on half throttle. We don't want to lift all the way off, and we don't want to touch the brakes. Allow the car to turn in, get the front end turning in, and as the apex really comes into view and comes kind of into the middle of the car, we can get full on the throttle. It's when you hook these couple of corners up, it's a real joy to drive. And then full throttle on the blue and white curb back there, drifting it over. Car did kind of get snagged a little bit here by the blue and white curb, so just be a little bit careful. Once again, ideally you want to be just a little bit on the inside of the left hand side. As you can see, it kind of splits into two here. The curb, the antenna is just a little bit in the way, but there's kind of like a split in this blue and white curb, and you want to be on the right hand side if you can. because it does snag it. You can see it unsettled the car a little bit. I only lost a little bit of time, probably a couple of hundredths, but as we know, every second, every millisecond counts. And then full throttle, trusting it, and I cross the line. And there we go, guys. That is a lap around Hockenheim at 1:31.46 to be exact. And I think that time will suit quite well here this week. I don't know, of course, what the temperatures are going to be like. Sometimes they're completely nothing like my track guides, which doesn't necessarily help all the time. But the principles that I've pointed out there are the same. But yeah, as always, hopefully that makes you more consistent, takes plenty of time off your lap times, and will allow you to gain plenty of iRating. So, happy racing, guys. Let me know what you think in the comments below, and I'll see you for the next one. Bye.